Good morning, Cam.
Hey, how's it going?
It's quite all right.
Zoom, for some reason, said my speaker wasn't working, but it sounds like it's working.
Yeah, I hear you fine.
I don't know what the issue was. Well, you had a good week, good 2 weeks, good 3 weeks. Gosh, seems like it's been forever.
Yeah, it's been a lot of crazy stuff happening, but things going well.
Good to hear. Do you have anything specific that you want to cover today?
I did not really anything major. Yesterday, I programmed a deselect macro. I do recommend it simply for the sake of Corel. I will need you to make a mention of it if you know anything about macros, for the reason that it still acts a little funky sometimes. Normally, when you use the escape key, you would think that it means to deselect or end editing on something.
Okay.
And after I programmed it, what it does is sometimes if you're editing nodes, it'll undo the last change that you made, and I can't figure out why, but
okay.
And the next thing, another thing is to switch over to wireframe or enhanced view, because I made a shortcut macro for this new mouse. The macro is Alt V, which opens up your view menu, and then W and enter, or Alt V, E, and then enter, which goes into enhanced view.
Okay.
And either way, I noticed it was running the add base shortcut. What I did is I simply turned off the shortcut for add base. So the button is still there. It's just because I rarely use that function except for at the end of a design. I just went ahead and turned off the add base shortcut. So I'm not sure if there's a first programmed, first serve setup in MemorialDESIGNER, but nothing really as far as in the function of Corel with MemorialDESIGNER.
So on your toggle view, why don't you just set your mouse button to do V?
Because
the toggle.
I originally thought that would be all right, and when I tried to do it, it didn't work the same way. I mean, it's not a huge ordeal, but because I'm switching from enhanced view to wireframe view so often, that's why I made a shortcut to it.
But when you just run V, which is the toggle button, what does it do?
Just V?
Yeah, just V.
Looks like nothing. It might have originally uh, added a vase. Does yours do that? I assume you're using Memorial Designer as well.
So just V on the keyboard runs my toggle view macro,
Mhm.
which just toggles between enhanced and wireframe.
Okay. It's Alt V for mine, and I think that's the default for Corel.
Yeah, so Alt V will do a vase, but Corel doesn't have a default for switching views.
Well, I installed Corel Draw at home, so I hadn't programmed any beforehand, any alternate shortcuts.
Uh-huh.
And when I was looking on the forums, getting it set up at home as well, it seems that other people that were setting up view macros, they had required to set up Alt V
Okay.
to bring up their view menu. And I was originally trying to get a shortcut that wouldn't even open the menu. It just would go right to it. But
So
Corel,
that is true. If you use the Alt keys, so like Alt F, Alt E, Alt V, Alt L, all of those are supposed to pop up the menus at the top, right? Because yeah, so you're right that Alt V should pop up that view menu.
yeah,
But I don't use the menus that way. So I just made Alt V my import vase button.
Mhm.
And I just have a toggle macro for going between enhanced and wireframe, which is what I set for V on the keyboard to be the shortcut for that.
Yeah. Yeah, I found myself switching between enhanced and wire view so often now that I found it really useful to set up a macro for that.
Right. What I'm saying is that there's one that already exists.
Oh, there is?
Yeah, that my toggle view button, that's what that does.
Oh, okay.
Let me share my screen with you real quick and I'll show you. All right, can you see my screen?
Mhm.
Yeah, so if we're in here, we've got fills on, so we got fills, right?
Mhm.
So my toggle view is right up here.
Okay.
If you click on that, it just goes from enhanced to wireframe. And if you click it again, it goes from wireframe back to enhanced. So if you look at the shortcut key afterward, there in the parentheses, it's just the letter V. So if I just hit V on the keyboard, it's going to toggle between the two.
Okay.
So if you haven't changed that, then you should be able to set your mouse button to the V key, and then V would then run that macro, which is my toggle view.
Gotcha. Yeah, I did not notice that, but I don't have Memorial Designer at home.
Okay.
I was just kind of following the same process that I used for the programming at home.
Gotcha. Yeah, certainly if you don't have the macro at home, I mean, then you'd have to build your own macro and set your own key and stuff. And you're right, if you set Alt V, which is what we use here for add vase, then those would conflict. But
Okay.
yeah, that's what I use, just default standard. And then on the macro itself that you created, the deselect macro, what exactly does deselect do?
Let's say you're in an item. Now, this doesn't work for a text box, as far as I know.
Okay.
Let's say you are manipulating the nodes at the corners of this stone.
Okay.
What you would do is you could hit escape and it will run a deselect function to where it will stop all of what you're doing, and then it immediately deselect that box or that shape. So it'll turn off the the immediate selection where the nodes are highlighted and all that stuff.
Okay.
And what it was for is I noticed I had an issue of switching over back to the pick tool if I was doing something else. I think CorelDRAW does not have an automatic deselect function or shortcut deselection. And so I just had to create a macro for it.
When you are switching to the pick tool, how are you trying to do that?
I switched the shortcut to 1, and then I programmed the mouse to set up to whenever you press 1, it would switch over.
Switch over to the pick tool.
Yep.
Okay. So if by default, I mean, if you're manipulating nodes, right?
Mhm.
And you hit escape, it's just going to stop selecting those nodes. It's going to keep you in the shape tool, but it's going to not have those nodes selected anymore. So that's your default behavior with hitting escape while node editing.
Mhm.
If you wanted to switch over to the pick tool, you can hit spacebar. Spacebar will switch over to the pick tool because it toggles between pick and whatever tool you are currently using. So just hitting spacebar is going to toggle between my pick tool and my shape tool. However, that's not necessarily going to deselect anything either, right? Unless you hit escape again while you're in the pick tool mode, then it will deselect. So if you were node editing like this, right? You hit escape, you hit space, and then you hit escape again. Those 3 clicks would clear out your selection, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Not something I've ever really tried to do myself, I guess. And you can, like you've already done, set the pick tool to be a certain keyboard shortcut. By default, there is not a keyboard shortcut for the pick tool. But if you did choose one on the keyboard, just so you know, in MemorialDESIGNER, I have turned convert to line as number 1 on the keyboard. So in my workflow, I'm using 1 and 2 to switch between line and curves. So if you replace, the pick tool with number 1 on your keyboard shortcuts, then that would no longer function either.
Yeah, the function I have set up between picker and then shape tool are also 1 and 2.
Okay.
And it's because of what I programmed on this mouse.
Sure.
Fortunately, it does not interrupt when using text. And I think that may be the same reason that the escape function does not immediately switch out of text, because it's trying to protect your use of the text box if you were going to enter the numbers and that sort of thing.
Sure. And I don't do a lot of the coding myself, but if you wanted to send us the code, we could take a look at it and see if there's something, that we noticed that's kind of funky with it. It's making it not do what you're hoping it would do.
Well, it's doing what I want it to do now. Just took a few minutes. But I had found on one of these message boards for the CorelDRAW community, someone had put together a deselect macro,
Gotcha.
which is pretty nice.
Cool. Good. Yeah, anything else that you needed to cover?
There was something, and now I forgot it. It's usually how that goes.
That's right. Amelia, it's good to see you. Get a drink real quick.
A lot of these setups for MemorialDESIGNER I really like, And so when I installed CorelDRAW at home, I was trying to mimic a lot of the, I guess you'd say, preferences
Right.
of how it's set up.
Yeah.
Oh, the other thing, we had previously talked about changing the extension of a CDR file into .zip.
Mhm.
And I just want to make sure that I know the exact content to remove to fix the file size, because I have a feeling that's still going to come up a few times. It's kind of a hard habit to break when you just save the file.
Sure.
Um,
Let me pull up 2018 real quick and see if I can get it to happen. I'll just, I gotta fake this. Give me just a second here.
we all know it's pretty annoying when you run a save file function and it ends up taking more than a minute to save. And if you're kind of compulsive about saving, it can be pretty annoying too.
Right. Okay, so I've got 2018 here, which is mostly where the problem lies. So we'll load up a design. And we'll add some fills. And maybe I'll change the fills a few times because I believe that it will add to the size depending on how many times you change the fills or how many fills you have in the file. So I'm just going to add a bunch of different fills here.
Okay. And also, I tend to have a lot of tabs too, and that may be adding to the problem. Pardon me.
So the only problem with the tabs, if you've got multiple designs open, is if you notice up here, you know how there's an asterisk right here saying that this file has not been saved yet.
Yes.
If you have a bunch of different documents open, so let's just open a bunch of them like this. So if you're working on 4 or 5 different documents and they have unsaved changes, when you go to close them like this, and then it asks, do you want to save changes? If you say yes, that's for the most part where the problem lies, is that as soon as you say yes to that question, it's embedding the fills for you. And so when you're working off of multiple tabs this way, it's quite often for people to want to close things out by hitting these little X button.
Yes.
And you know, if it's not already saved, that's when it prompts. So if you say no, and then you go back into that file and go up to file and save it first, and then exit out of it, then you shouldn't run into that problem. As that's really where the bug is at, is with that prompt for it asking you to save.
Oh, that's not quite what I meant. I meant the pages tab at the bottom.
Yeah, those, I mean, that's going to slow things down if you have a lot of page tabs, right? Because then it's having to restore fills on every one of those pages all at the same time. And so let's say you've got 24 objects on this page, right? Let's just make a bunch of revision pages here really fast. So I've got, all right, so now I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pages worth of designs, okay? Obviously, the more designs you have in the same file, when we go to save this file or open the file, it's going through each of those and refilling them the way that they used to be, and it's having to look at them and see if they were scaled. And you know, there's a lot of stuff on the back end that it's doing to get those fills done correctly. So for sure, the more pages you have in your document, the longer it's going to take. I myself, you know, I've got a revision page and I've got a plot page, so I use those, but I hardly ever go more than 3 or 4 pages in a single document. If I were to go more than that, I would expect it to slow down, and I would probably in that case make another CorelDRAW file just to keep it from being so slow.
Yeah, I would encourage the same.
Yeah, it was never meant to have, 50 different pages of stuff open at the same time. It's really, when I do a revision, excuse me, when I do a revision, I'll do maybe 3 revisions, without charging somebody extra. So anything beyond that, I'm going to probably just start a new thing. And I hardly ever get to that point. So it's just not part of my workflow to do something like that. But
you wrote the MemorialDESIGNER software, correct?
and not myself, my oldest brother.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So
I don't do the programming itself. I just
okay.
I do the development, all the buttons and layout, UI, and all that sort of stuff.
Okay. Well, I guess you would be close enough to for me to make a recommendation. There's a lot of useful buttons within MemorialDESIGNER, and one I would recommend because of the file size quickly getting out of control, even though we've discussed this, how to get past it. I would recommend a button that runs through all the pages and turns off all the fills for all items, like forget fills. Maybe that would fix any file size bloating. And that way you wouldn't have to go through every single page to do it. But like you said, it was never meant to run about 50 pages or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with forgetting them is that then you have to go back and remember what they were filled with, right?
Yeah.
So the whole point is that you don't have to remember that. And that's why it's set to remember those fills when it closes out the program.
Yes.
And it also depends on your document, how just what you've got in that document and how it's done, whether the document itself has a lot of different objects and stuff, because if there's a lot of different objects, it's got to go through and find all those objects, not just pages. And so that can make a big difference too. If you don't have things combined together, you've got 1,000 different objects, it's got to go through and search 1,000 things. And if it's doing that for 50 pages, now all of a sudden it's doing 50,000 searches. So it can add up.
Yeah, it's exponential.
Right, exactly. So I really try to keep my my documents to a few pages, 3 or 4 tops. And when I'm working with my objects, I want to make sure that they're all combined and stuff as much as I can, so that I'm using the least amount of objects that I can as well. Okay, so I'm going to show you this here really quick. I just saved that file, and because I closed out of it and it said, do you want to save the file? Then that's when it should have embedded the file, those fills in the font, or sorry, in the file, right? So if I right click on this and rename it, I'm in quick access, and I go to my actual documents. Okay, so if I right click on this and rename it to a .zip, I go in, and you can see down here it's 24 megabytes, right? So it's much larger than it should be. If I go into the file, there's a styles folder now. And that's what happened, was it has created styles out of each of those colors. So if I go into the styles folder, you'll see all of these .color bitmap files. And so each of these adds up to 32 megabytes. And those are the ones that, if you want to reduce your file size, you can delete. You don't want to delete this one, the document.cdss, because if you do that, then your file is going to get corrupted. and it's not going to open correctly anymore. But if you just get rid of these color bitmaps, delete those, they're gone. And we'll go back. Now our file size is back to 155 kilobytes, which is what I would expect. Get a CDR file. I can open up that CDR. So you can see how long that took. I mean, that was 5 pages, right? It took, I don't know, 5 seconds or so. But there's also no objects. All there is, I mean, there's no like individual pieces. There's 24 objects on 5 pages. So we can multiply that and, you know, what is that, like 25 different objects that it's going to search through. But you can see that it did bring back the colors the way that they're supposed to be on each of those pages. And, you know, it's possible that we could make it make a checkbox for only restore colors on page 1, because that would speed it up on an initial load, right, of a design. So that might be something that we could look at doing, is restoring just the fills on page 1 instead of all pages. Because if you were to go to, you know, this page, you could always, it looks like, yeah, it looks like the fill grayscale works on all pages at the same time. So maybe we should, I don't know, maybe we should change that to on a per page level as opposed to the whole document. Something to think about anyway. Because when I click restore fills, that's going to go through and restore all those fills too at the same time. But does that answer your question as to what files you need to get rid of?
Absolutely.
So it's just those .color bitmap files. There are other things in a file that can cause, you know, the file to be larger if you put bitmaps and stuff in those. If you're bringing in photographs, or if you're clicking on the vase button and it's bringing in vases, you know, those things will all add. So if you've got vase, or if you click on this and you've got your flowers in there, okay, let's say you've done that, but now you have, you know, all of these different layouts have flowers on them, then you're going to end up with all of those bitmaps duplicated as well, which is going to add to the file size. If you do that a lot, there are ways around it. There are things called symbols, or there are linked images that you can do so that it's really only pulling the data for that bitmap once, as opposed to, you know, 50 different times. But it's not something that I do a lot, so I don't really care about it. But if that's in your workflow to have, you know, a ton of bitmaps all on your same page that are all the exact same thing, then that might be something to look at as well.
Yeah, when I begin a file, usually what I do is, because we've had some trouble with the Connect feature.
Okay.
What I usually do is at the very beginning, I move in all the customer relevant data, name, dates, custom pictures that they want to use. And that's usually what I bring in on the first page. And I don't always copy all of that, but it's just so I can get an idea of how much space I'm going to use.
Okay.
And sometimes I accidentally find myself copying all that. And I know that that can take up space if you continuously do that and copy them. But I find myself doing it every now and then, and I know that can take up space.
When you mentioned the Connect, are you talking about Stonespot Connect or the Connect Docker over here?
Yeah, Stonespot Connect.
Okay. What kind of issues are you having with that?
I don't remember the exact issue, but it seems like it's having trouble connecting to the database itself, and
Okay,
it could be a problem on our end. Um, I'd have to work with Josh to figure out what's going on with that.
okay, yeah, let me know. Certainly if there's something that's not working, we want to get it fixed. So I know there was um, an issue, I want to say a week ago. They had pushed changes over the weekend and it wasn't working for about a day or so. But everything should be functioning right now. So if you run into problems there, let me know on that one. Analia, did you have anything that you wanted to cover specifically today? What I was hoping to get to, when I had a customer that asked about how to digitize a specific design. So I thought I'd go over the steps on how I would go about digitizing that, if that's something that interests you guys. I was just going to kind of go start to finish on that one to show my workflow and what I do on that, if you have nothing else that you want to cover. So if you do, let me know. Just add it to the chat, Analia, and we can go from there. But I think what I'll do is go ahead and start on this other file. So the way that they emailed me the file. So my workflow would be to usually open up Outlook, which is what I use for my email. And I went ahead and emailed this to myself just so that you can see how it works. I've got the email selected in Outlook. You don't necessarily have to have it open, but in your Outlook inbox, you would have the email selected. And then inside CorelDRAW or MemorialDESIGNER, I would use the import attachments from Outlook button. And what that does is it goes to Outlook and looks for anything that's attached to that email that is selected, and then it imports it so that I don't have to go and, from Outlook, save the file and then come in and say import and that sort of stuff. So that's to speed up the workflow from email, being able to import your files. Now this is what they want to duplicate. They've got, I'd assume, a family member that wants, the same design. But this is definitely not the prettiest picture in the world, right? It's pretty low quality. So if it were me, I would want to check first to see if there was another image that I could use. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Find Grave. Pop that up here. And I can't remember the name, so let's go like this. It's going to be year born is 1936, and the year died was 2000. So I'd usually search Find a Grave. Excuse me. See if I can find a better picture. So it looks like this is the guy that we're looking for. And here's an image here, which looks to be about the same exact image that we've got, but it's a little higher quality. And there is usually a View Original button, which may or may not give us an even better quality image. So I'll grab that and copy the image that we've got, and then I'll paste it here. And that will then show us whether that's any better or not. It's about the same, but I don't know what happened here in that image. If the paper tore or what, I don't know what that is, but anyway, so that's about the same. If we keep looking, see if there are any other images, pictures of him. Here's one more. It looks to be a little higher quality, but you can't see the top portion. So that's kind of an issue there, but I do like that this is higher quality or higher DPI. So I'm going to paste that one as well. So what I've really got to work with is these two images. I normally don't go anywhere else other than Find a Grave to see if anything exists. There are other sites like million graves or whatever. But I've got usually pretty good results with find a grave. So that's where I'd start. Both of these images, as you can see, are taken at angles, and I don't know exactly how large this is. So I'm just going to give it my best guess. Okay. And I'm going to start out with, we'll just say this over here. Let's say this is a 42 by 24 or something like that. Okay. And what I want to do is I want to get this to be straight or straighter. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust perspective on this until it fits inside the shape that I just created. So going to wireframe, I feel doesn't give you a really good image because it's making this not very high quality. So that doesn't work very well on my end. So I would normally just right click the outline, left click so that there's no fills. And that way I've got the outline of my stone, but I can see through to what's underneath it. Sometimes I'll come in and just kind of grab that lower left corner and place it there. And then I'll come up and start adding my perspective. So if I go to object perspective, add perspective, that gives me my handles that I can pull on these corners. And really with perspective, I've got to work my way around the design in order for this to work. And it looks like if I'm doing it at 42 by 24, it looks like I'm too tall. It's going to be stretched out too much. So maybe I don't want to do 42 by 24. So instead, let's replace this shape and see how it works. So we're going to do a 20 inch instead. Hit OK. We'll try that and see how that one works. So still going back to perspective. Well, we've actually already applied it, so we don't need to go back. We just need to switch back over to our shape tool. And I'm simply pulling on these corners until the corner of the picture matches up with the corner of my shape there. And you can see how off the original perspective was, just because of the extreme angle that the photo was taken at. And obviously if there's grass and stuff like that, it's going to be a little harder to tell. Sometimes I will drop down a guideline like this. So from this book to this book is normally going to be straight, right? So if I mess with these corners, I should be able to get it a little straighter. Now this is trying to snap because I have snapping on, so it's trying to snap to that same node. If I hold Q on the keyboard while I'm pulling that, Q on the keyboard does a temporary turning snap off temporarily. So if I'm really tight in here, I can hold Q on the keyboard and it's not going to try to snap there anymore. I do that quite often as well. And again, you can see that this bottom edge and this bottom edge are not quite lined up. So I'm obviously not in the corner there. Again, it's hard to tell because of the grass, but I would bring this up until these match up a little better. So it's not perfect by any means. And who knows if that's the exact size that it is, but that's my best guess. I'm going to come in here and I can measure. And I usually just use squares or whatever to measure with. That's a 1 inch letter. So this is probably 1 1/4 inch letter. And if we look at that, that's pretty typical in the monument industry to do 1 1/4 inch names and inch dates. And so I'm going to call it good on guessing the size of that. And then from here, I would start working over the top of my design. If I wanted to, I could crop this. I have noticed that the crop tool when you are cropping something that has a bit perspective applied to it, sometimes does not work quite the way that I want. Cropping seems to be okay, but if I go back and try to add perspective again, it looks like it's working now, so that's good. But in the past, I've seen where it kind of gets crazy, so that's just something to look at as well. But it looks like we're doing okay. I guess that corner is not quite where I want it to be. And cropping usually makes it a little easier for me to line up those edges as well. So if I crop it first to get it more to the size of my piece, then I can readjust this. And again, I'm going to hold the Q so that I'm able to get that. And now you can see that and those line up a little bit better. They're squared up a little bit better. So just, you know, and obviously it doesn't have to be exact, but I want it to be as close as possible. And if I had measurements of the stone, and if I had, you know, taken the picture with something in it that I knew the exact measurement of, I'd work it a little bit differently. But this is what we're going to work with. Okay, so this portion, the bar, it looks to me like the panel goes all the way to the bottom of the stone. And if we look at this one, it's kind of hard to tell because it's dirty, but again, it looks like it goes all the way to the bottom of the stone. So that's my guess, is that the panel is not, you know, it doesn't have a bottom. It's just going off the bottom of the stone. So I would normally draw a rectangle like this and just snap it to the bottom of my stone. And then I would come into panels and spacing and build a double line. Do not want to do scallops, so I'm going to undo my scalloped corners and go like that. So now I've got my double line, but that's obviously pulling in a panel, you know, that's lower than the shape of the stone. So there's a couple things you can do. You can mess with nodes. If you grab these nodes, let's just say we grab all of these ones, because this right here is the bottom of our stone. If we grabbed all of those nodes, we could tell it to, in the align and distribute Docker, we could have it align all of those nodes to the top, and that's going to pull all those nodes up to the top node, which is that one. So that works for the frosted portion. And then this portion, if we just pull it up ourselves, and I held control while I did that so that it stayed in line, that's going to pull that up as well. So now we've got our panel running off the end. So that's probably how I would do it. An alternative is you can draw another box like this. And you can use something called trim. So if I shift select this, then you can trim and do the same thing for this piece, trim. So that's another option, is to just use another object to trim back the object that you had created. Whether or not I could use the shape of the stone to trim, sometimes instead of creating another object, I'll just grab this one and pull it down like this. And while I'm pulling down, if I right click, then it makes a copy. So that way I've got a, you know, another piece that's already at the spot that I need it to be, and then I can use that as my trim. So different ways of going about it, and depending on my mood really determines what I do for the day. But those are different options. So I'll go ahead and align these nodes, grab these ones and pull them up. We'll go about it that way. But there's our panel on the bottom. The books, I don't really have any desire to go and redraw a book that's probably already been drawn a million times. So for that, I would go to the Connect Content Docker, and I don't know if I've got it set up on here or not. I play with things so much, I don't know if I really do. So we will see if I've got the images available. If I don't use Connect Content, then I'll normally just go to open or import, or I will go and just go to File Explorer, and I can go and find my files that way as well. So if I come in here and go to Sandblast and classic collection. And I can do a search here for book. And then that pops up a bunch of book panels that we can, see if they're going to work. Because I work on multiple monitors, I kind of like this workflow, because then I can have a whole monitor worth of stuff that I'm looking at. I can maximize, this over on my second monitor. So what I'd be doing is I'd be looking for a book that is very similar. I do also have in the classic collection scalable books. Scalable. So I've got a whole folder here of scalable things, and one of the files in there is called books. It's books here. So I might use that, and I'll show you why. So I'll just drag and drop that over there. Maybe I've got something similar. It looks like this one here is probably the closest. So if I ungroup these, pull this one over, get rid of all the rest of these. So the way that the scalable books work is I've got these drawn with single lines. If I go to wireframe, you'll see they're single lines, but they've got an outline applied, which means that they can be scaled and maintain that outline width. So if I shrink this in, for instance, like this, it's going to keep my V lines, my 0.09 inch V lines, because I'm using just a single line with an outline applied. And, whether or not this is going to fit exactly, I might need to change it up a little bit. And it depends too on how close they're really wanting us to get to that original design. This one, if we look at the books, it's got a little open part there, which to me doesn't really make sense why a book would be open. So I don't know that I would keep that way. I would probably suggest to the family that I don't do it that way. So I would likely do something like this, where I'm just getting a book that's close to the look, about the same size, and go from there. If I wanted to do it exactly, I could certainly go through and do it exactly. It just doesn't, to me, make sense to have a book that's open, because that's just not what a book does, right? So I'd go about it this way. Because this is a single line, I need to do something in order to get it to my double lines. And that's when I come up to object and say, convert outline to object. That's going to take all of those single lines and convert it to a double line. Because it was combined to begin with, it's going to automatically weld, that was a weird word, weld all those things for me. So then all I need to do is hit F to fill it with the grayscales. And if I wanted to match this one that's got the polish showing through, I would then also knock out these pieces here. And I'd probably knock this out too. I don't know, maybe I'll keep it. And then I'll hit escape to end my knockout. Otherwise I'd get into trouble. So I've got my panel there. Then I'll add my text. So I will come in and I'll just type it all in. I normally type it all in first, and then I'll go and change fonts and sizes and that sort of stuff later. So I'll break it up. As soon as I break it up, I can change my size. I hit Control and the 8 key on the numeric keypad to go up by 1/8 inch increments. That's going to get me up to an inch and a quarter. And then these are also a condensed font. if I wanted to use MD Roman, which I've already got, there is an MD Roman Condensed. So I could switch over to MD Roman Condensed. I actually like the Monument Lettering Center fonts better than my own fonts. So I would probably, instead of doing that, come in and choose one of the Monument Lettering Center fonts, MLC, Condensed, SKS, something like that instead. And you can see, if we look at these H's, you know, the bar on the H, if we go back to my font versus theirs, the bar on the H matches better. So I think this is a better match anyway. And then if we look at these, the P and the A and the N, those are all smaller than the rest because I didn't type in all caps. So in order to get that to all caps, I just hit the toggle here for all caps on those to get them the size that I need. And I can eyeball it, or I can, you know, try to align this as best I can, or I can come in and I'll usually just, again, take a rectangle to see how much space there is between those lines of text. And if I come over here to this side, you know, I can look at that as well. Something like that. Do it again over here. And it's a little hard to tell when you're, you know, on an image that's not super great. But this is somewhere between 3/8 and this one looks to be about 1/4. So maybe I would do it that way, where I'm going to do 3/8 spacing from here to here. And I'll just come over to panels and spacing and do 0.375, hit apply. That'll give me 3/4 inch or 3/8 inch spacing. And maybe it's all 3/8, but it looked more like 1/4 on the text. At least on that side. On this side, it doesn't look to be the same. So I don't know what the deal is there. I think I'll stick with 3/8 inch spacing all the way around. So I'll just grab these and go back to 3/8 like that. Okay, and then I'll grab all that and hit C to center it. So now my text is centered on my panel. So I've got that. And then I need to work on this curve. If I were to just use drawing tools, let's say the polyline, for instance, I could come in here and start a line and come up to about here. And then holding Alt on the keyboard, holding Alt will change to doing an arc. So if I do that, then I can drop another node there, and then I'll come down and drop a node there, and I might come over and finish it off. That doesn't quite fit with what's underneath there, so maybe I'll pull those nodes down and see if I can get that to fit a little bit better. These two nodes here, normally, you know, you're going to want those to be symmetrical or the same on either side. So I might not go about it that way. I might just use shapes instead. Or maybe we could, you know, align these nodes. If I align them to the top that way, this one really needs to be in the center for it to work correctly. So that's going to change that a little bit. So I might not do it that way. I might do it where I'm building a circle like this. And then I could build a square like this. Then I could take that circle and the square and weld them together. I just hit W on the keyboard to weld, or if you come up here, weld is this one. I might do it that way too, where I just take two objects and weld them together in order to get that shape that I want. Well, that's pretty close on the way that that is. And then these lines here, these look to just be straight lines, so I can just pull that line all the way up like that. And if I've got this one filled, and I take this and center it, I'm not going to do this. So if I take this and center it on the stone, then this one here if I were to mirror it, just hit M on the keyboard. Actually, I think it's mirroring off of this, so we're going to get rid of this. Let's try that again. I'll grab this. Now it's going to be mirrored the exact same from that side. And this here, I don't know if it's centered either. So I'm going to hold Shift, select this, and hit C to center it. That brings it over a little bit that way. Now these are not double lines, but if I grab them, and I'm going to combine them together. If I use my line width tool here, that's going to give me my 0.09, just like this was before. And so I can apply that line width like that. And then I can just come back up and say convert outline to object, or Control Shift Q, and that will then convert to my double lines for me. And we've got this where we've there's a couple things you can do to get these lines the way that you want them to be. But what I would normally do is probably overlap them like that. Well, I don't know. Maybe I wouldn't. I might just, the upside to not welding them to this panel is that we could always reuse this and not use the center. You know, if we were to reuse this design, we could pull this whole center piece out. But since this is just a duplicate, maybe I'll go ahead and I'll just weld it. So I'm going to grab this and select this one and hit W to weld, and it's going to weld to that one, and it's going to automatically then wherever those overlaps were, it's going to pull those out. And so now I've got it the way that I want. And the only thing left that I have is this top. In order to get this fillable, I have to have a closed object up here on the top. Yep. So if I go back on Aaliyah, this is, I'm just drawing with a single line, okay, but I applied line width, so I applied an outline to it. You can see up here it's 6.48 points, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense to do things in points. But if we were to switch that over, if I double click this and switch this over to inches, then you'll see it's 0.09 inches. So by switching it over to having that thickness, then when I go and say convert outline to object, then it's going to convert that to the double lines instead of the single that I had before. And if I wanted to weld, I would only select the outline, just this outline one, and weld it. And that's going to then get that the way that I want it to be done there. So the only thing that I'm left with is this top portion here. In order for this to be fillable, I have to have this closed at the top. Okay. So there's a couple things that we can do in order to close that. But because if we look at the stone, it's kind of hard to tell, but I'm fairly certain there is no hard line there, just like there's no hard line here. So I think what I would probably do just to save time is use Smart Fill. And using Smart Fill, I can click inside here. And that will then fill this in and give me a frosted section that then fits to the top of the stone. However, if I Smart Fill, this is going to give me double cuts. It's going to give me double lines that I, when it comes to cutting, I need to make sure I delete this in order to not get double cuts. So I need to pay attention to that. And in that case, normally I'll go to the object docker and just rename this to like, so that I know that way I need to delete that before I cut. But that's what I would do, is I'd just go like that. Now I can mirror this. I can come down here and type in and resize bar. I deleted that object underneath. I should have just hidden it, but so we can mess with it like that. And then I would just go and find my clip art pieces to bring in the praying hands and the roses and that sort of stuff. But gets us to our hour today. So I'm going to stop before we do that. But those are the steps that I would take if I was trying to duplicate this in order to, get that whole design figured out. So thanks for being here today. If you have questions, certainly let me know for next time. But other than that, thanks for coming, and we will see you all next week.